Good afternoon. Welcome everyone on the behalf of the Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management and the project team of IDACS the Netherlands to this webinar on sharing user information on charging points. It's very good to have you with us. I see there are already 43 of you joining us today. I'm hoping for a bit more. We accepted around 70 invitees for this webinar. My name is Pauline Lans. I'm the project manager of IDACS, and I'm this host for you this afternoon. I'm waiting for the presentation to be on screen. I don't have it yet. Well, first of all, I have some practical requests. Please mute your microphone. I hear everyone's muted at the moment, so that's very good. Thank you very much. This webinar will be recorded as well, and the video will be shared with you afterwards. Just like the presentation, this also will be available by link. And after each topic, there will be the opportunity to ask some questions. These questions can be raised within an application called Slido Q&A. I will tell you more about this Slido application in a minute. And together with my colleagues Hielke Schurer, Bastijn Ravensworst and Maarten Vleerakkers, we organized this webinar in order to inform you about the developments within IDACS, the legislation and the instruments that have been developed for this implementation. It's good to see who is who. You can't see us. Well, we can't see you. Therefore, I would like to introduce you to my colleague Hielke Schurer. He is the project lead of IDACS on electric charging points and working at the Netherlands Enterprise Agency. And Bastijn Ravensworst will tell you more about the legislation. He's coordinating policy advisor at the Ministry of Infrastructure and Water Management. And Maarten Vleerakkers will tell you more about the general terms and conditions for data sharing. And also on behalf of them, I'd like to welcome you this afternoon. Let's have a look at the timetable for today. We've already sent you this together with the confirmation of this webinar. First, we will tell you more about IDACS, the results and an outlook for 2021. Bastijn Ravensworst will tell you more on the legislation, which will enter into force 1st of July. And then Hielke Schurer and Maarten Vleerakkers will also familiarize you with the instruments that have been developed for further implementation. Now, you know who we are, but we also like to know who you are. And therefore, we use the Slido tool to set some polls and also to address the questions you have on the content. So please join us at slido.com. You can enter the hashtag IDACS, or you can use the application within your MS Teams. In the right corner, you see an S. This stands for Slido. If you click on this application, it opens automatically within MS Teams. So you don't have to go to a separate web page. Another option is to, for example, use your telephone and scan the QR code. It will direct you to the website of Slido, and you will also enter on the IDACS page. On this IDACS page, you have two options: to answer the polls or to raise questions in the Q&A. Within the Q&A, there's also an option that if one of you has addressed a question, you can also like it. And the number of likes will make that they go up. So we'll see what to discuss. First question: what type of organization do you work for? Is it a mobility service provider, a charge point operator, branch organization, government, non-government organization? I see a lot of charge point operators, government, also other. Well, good to have you with us today. I see half of you is representing a charge point operator or mobility service provider, and also a lot of colleagues from the government are joining us, and a few colleagues from advice and branch organizations. Good to have you with us. Thank you very much for answering this question. We would also like to know, in which of the following subjects are you most interested in? Today we will talk about IDACS, the ID management and the data collection, the new legislation, and the instruments. Please go ahead and fill in the question. I see most of you are curious about the legislation, which will enter into force 1st of July. Bastijn will tell you more about that after we presented IDACS. I see that's the most popular topic for today. Nevertheless, I would like to start with IDACS. IDACS is an abbreviation for ID and data collection for sustainable fuels in Europe. And IDACS is a program support action which is co-financed by the Connecting Facility Europe of the European Union. A program support action means that this project is supportive to new legislation by the European Commission and implementation of new concepts, and also a vehicle for new member states to exchange knowledge, harmonization of activities, and to support implementation. The consortium of IDACS contains of 15 member states, and the PSA IDACS is derived from two directives, the ITS directive and the AFI directive. Within IDACS, we would like to contribute to two main objectives. We aim to support structural market development for a European-wide approach for assigning ID codes to the e-mobility actors, which better known as the CPOs and the MSPs. And we also aimed for better consumer awareness and buy-in to the use of alternative fuels through better information about location and availability of electric charging points, hydrogen, and as well as other fuels such as CNG and LNG. And in order to fulfill these objectives, we undertake several activities within the project of IDACS. They're being executed within the scope of the project, but also beyond. The ones beyond we call supporting activities. You see on the main left in blue the IDACS activities. We have activity 1, which is on ID management. This includes the alignment on the use of an ID format for e-mobility codes, the setup of an IDRO. IDRO stands for ID Registration Office, and also the setup of an IDRR. IDRR stands for ID Registration Repository. I will get back to that in a minute. And we are also concerning ourselves with the strategy for continuation of both these organizational types. Within activity 2, data collection, this is the data collection on the national access points for electric charging points, hydrogen, and other fuels. There are also supporting activities to make this all work. Of course, the NAP, the National Access Point. There are different forms of NAPs. You can see these: data register, data database, data warehouse, and a data marketplace. Within the IDACS projects, several of the member states have made a different choice, which means that not all of them have the same architecture. And one of the other supporting activities is the legislation. All of the member states will have to do this on their own, as the translation from the European legislation to the national legislation is different for each of the countries. Within the first year of IDACS, we started with the involvement of stakeholders on member state level to hear your concerns, ideas, and possible solutions. And also during the project, we held several expert groups and we consulted stakeholders on a national level to see if we were on the right track, to gain more input, and also to be in touch. In 2019, we aligned with the IDACS consortium, so the 15 member states, on the use of an ID format, the design for the IDRO, and the guideline for data collection. Last year, we started with the implementation of the several topics and the design of an IDRR. We also started the data discussion on data categories, the harmonization of these categories, and quality requirements. This year is the last year of IDACS. IDACS is a project of 3 years, which started in 2019, which means that we will complete the implementation of the IDRO and the IDRR, as well as the data provision on the national access points and the data provision on alternative fuels. Also, the conversion to the DATEX2 format has been made possible in the upcoming months. And we are currently working with a consortium on the strategy for continuation and writing reports for the European Commission. These reports will also be available at the end of the year on the official website of the European Union. First, I would like to tell you more about the ID management, which is activity 1. My colleague Hilke will tell you more about activity 2. I use a few concepts which I would like to show to you more in perspective with a visualization. Below you see the charging points, which all of them have an own ID. These are unique IDs, and they are meant for organizations who manage these charge stations, the CPOs. And these ID codes are also used by mobility service providers for their contracts. These ID codes are issued by IDROs. This is on a member state level, on a country level, and the IDRR, which I just introduced, is on European level. And they cooperate with all the IDROs. The ID format for e-mobility codes consists of 2 parts. The first part is a national code and issued by the ID registration office. And the second part, the part 2, is issued by the mobility service provider or charge point operator to identify contracts or charge points. This format was already there, I think, about already 10 years. And when we started with IDACS, it was already in use by 4 of the member states who joined the consortium, including the Netherlands. And during the first year of IDACS, the consortium agreed upon the use of the current format, as this is adequate for the European ID issuing and also usable for the market. And in this way, the ID format is adopted in 15 countries, which is a really nice accomplishment by the IDACS project. There were also some few recommendations on the use of the ID format, for example, not to use the separators, as this could be confusing for several IT systems. Within IDACS, we also set up a framework for the ID registration office. This is an office which has to be set on a national level for each of the consortium members. The framework you see on the left, it describes the governance, some functional, some technical aspects, and the quality assurance. Furthermore, we also developed a set of 9 general rules, which are used by all of the consortium members. These general rules of an IDRO consist, for example, of that each MSP can request several IDs. This is also brought in by the Netherlands, as we noticed that this is currently the situation in the Netherlands and should be applicable to any IDRO. That if companies are both MSP and CPO, they need 2 IDs, and that any IDRO may ask a cost covering fee. There are 5 more of these rules. They are available at the website of each of the IDROs. The IDRR, this is the consortium where we work together with all the IDROs. They will have to perform 3 main tasks. They have to present an overview of basic information about the IDs, the format, but also have a link on the website to all of the IDROs. They will have to manage discussions if there need to be any changes. This will be done by the steering committee of the IDRR, and also be able to manage IDs on behalf of countries who cannot run their own IDRO. The IDRR must offer this, so that in governance everything is arranged. My last slide will be on the Dutch implementation. in the Netherlands, we already used the ID format, so there won't be any changes to the ID e-mobility format. However, our ID registration organization is currently hosted by a branch organization, and the IDACS project has led to a decision by the government, in good consultation with this branch organization, IVILIN, to set up a governmental IDRO. We collaborated with Belgium and Luxembourg on this to set up an IDRO for the Benelux, which has a responsive web portal, and will also be able to execute IDRO tasks for other countries. The fees will be cost covering and will be no higher than present. The handover for these IDRO tasks is planned for mid-2021, so in a couple of months. I also have a question about this. If you were already familiar with the handover of these IDRO tasks from IVILIN to the Benelux, please vote in the poll on Slido. I see up and for now then, well, more than half of you wasn't familiar with this handover, so it's good that you're here, and that I can inform you on this this change. As I said, it's planned by mid-2021. IVILIN has also stated this on the invoice of last year. There will be more communication. You will receive a separate letter from IVILIN with the actual date of the handover and also where to find more information. I can also state that all fees which have been paid for 2021, they are fine by now, and 2022, the Benelux IDRO, they will take over the fees and send you a new invoice. This was my presentation on activity 1. Hielke, are there already questions within the Q&A of Slido?
Yeah, we have one question. By the way, you can ask your questions in Slido. I'm not sure if we already mentioned that, but if you haven't seen it already, you can ask your questions in the Slido app, and you can also like comments or questions if you also interested in it. We have one question, but I'm not sure if we can answer it. Are the IDACS guidelines for IDs somehow consistent with the EMI3 standards? But yeah, like Michelle already replies, they are.
Yeah, they are completely in line, and also with the ISO guidelines, the 15118. So it's the same ID format actually.
And we have some new ones. I'm not sure if we can answer all of them. Why a need to register an ID per country, or why can't we use a single ID in the EU? That's a relevant question, of course, but
that's a good question. I'm not sure if I'm able to answer this. I am replacing my colleague Anneke Bosma, who was IDACS project manager for the last 2 years. I understood that it was desirable to do it first per country, and perhaps maybe in a later stage it will be on a European level, but for now the decision made to be it on a country level.
Okay. Yeah, for us, if we look at the time, I think it's best if we move on.
Yes, I would give the stage to you, Hielke.
But we will collect the questions that have been asked. Yeah, I'll take over from Pauline. Yeah, I will discuss the results. Are we there with the presentations? The results of the other activity, which is activity 1, and which is data collection, data provision. And I will briefly discuss the results on European level and also what this means for the Dutch implementation. So if we move on to the European level, just shortly, the aim was to start with the data provision via national access point. That was the aim of IDACS in all participating countries within the IDACS project. And this data should also become available in DATEX 2. More about that later in the presentation about DATEX 2. And in addition to electric charging points, this also concerns data about hydrogen and CNG and LNG, but obviously we're not going to discuss that today. And mainly broadly speaking, to achieve this goal, there were roughly 4 main activities, and I will briefly describe for these activities what the results are. So the first one was the minimum set of harmonized data categories. We can see that on the next slide. That countries agreed upon to provide at their NAP, because like I said, the aim of the project was to have data collection, but first we had to agree on which categories should be made available and what exactly is meant by such a category. So that's why we came up with this harmonized set, and the sheet gives you a brief overview of the static and dynamic categories. They are further elaborated in the project in a version, but this one is finalized right now. So it's too much to share here on your screen. It comes down that all countries in the IDACS project ensure that these categories will become available via the NAP or at the NAP, depends on which form. And these categories also correspond to the categories that set out under our national legislation. Bastien will tell you more about that later on. But in this legislation, we have slightly renamed some categories so that it becomes more clear what is actually meant by them. And this is also partly due to the input that we gathered during the internet consultation of some of you. And in addition, it's also good to know that this is a minimum. This is a minimum set that all countries agreed upon to share at the NAP, but of course we can't stop countries for being more ambitious. So it's possible that they can add categories or have higher demands. And as you probably will know by now, Netherlands is one of those countries. They add energy source, for example, but Bastien will tell you more about that later on. We move on to the second one, the minimum set of quality criteria. This activity was to identify a minimum set of those quality criteria. This is still work in progress. It sometimes can be a little bit challenging to reach agreement on these kind of criteria with all the countries. Again, it's good to realize that these are minimum criteria. So countries can be more ambitious. And also in this case, the Netherlands, for instance, has a higher ambition if it comes to the freshness of data. So the update frequency is higher as it is put down in the legislation. So this is in short what it is right now, but it's still work in progress. And the next one is, and the final one is about DATEX 2, making data accessible in DATEX 2. It's on the next sheet. And probably if I say DATEX 2, for some of you, it may not immediately sound familiar. And it's in short, it's a European standard for exchange of traffic-related data. So not necessarily electric charging points, but they recently have added these categories for electric charging points. So in the beginning of the project, the Commission added DATEX 2 as a requirement for the IDACS project, to include this in the project to see if this could be an option to get everything in the same format in all the countries, in order to have like a uniform layer. But the question is, who will ultimately make use of this data format? But we have already informed the Commission about that. But it is a requirement in the IDACS project, so we're working on it. And that comes down to that we have a guideline right now for the countries on how to implement it. And some countries already have started with this. And there are basically, roughly speaking, 2 options: that you build a conversion tool that is either accessible to the organization who runs the NAP, or to another way, but you make a conversion tool, or you make sure that existing data platforms or data aggregators can deliver this data in DATEX 2 format. That is also possible. So that is, roughly speaking, on the European level. Then we move on to the Dutch implementation. Before I continue, it's good to know that much use was made from the input actually from e-mobility stakeholders. Actually, since the kickoff in 2019 of this project, multiple meetings have been there with an expert group. This expert group contained included CPOs, governments, or other parties who had data services in it, and we collected input on various topics such as the NAP, the data categories, or the legislation, or the general terms and conditions for sharing data. So if we look at the Dutch implementation here in short, we see that there will be data provision on the NAP, as explained as the data register for electric charging points. And therefore, we use a minimum set of data categories, which is in line with the data categories that I've showed you before. And there are two tools that we've also included. That is the minimum, the uniform set of general terms and conditions, but Martin will explain this in a few minutes. And the DATEX2 conversion tool, and that will also be discussed later in this presentation. And if we look to the supporting activities that are that are strongly linked with IDACS, so the NAP and legislation. Legislation, Bastijn will tell you in a minute about everything. But the NAP, if it comes to the NAP, you see that we choose to have a data register. But before I continue to the next slide to explain it a little bit more in detail, I would first have a quick question for you if you are a CPO. So if you have the Slido in front of you or in MS Teams or whatever, please answer this question. Only relevant if you are a party which has to share data on the NAP or via the NAP. And it's maybe interesting to see if you already have data on the NAP accessible that can be directly, you're registered at a NAP, or it could be via a third party. So currently this is, for instance, Eco Movement. So I'm not sure how much CPOs we have in the group, but 12 people filled it in right now. And we see that quite some people already have their data accessible via the NAP. And also quite some people I'm not sure yet or don't have yet. So that's good to know. So let me just briefly explain the Dutch situation with the NAP as it will be. Next slide, please, then. You see in the next slide, we'll see the situation. You'll see we've decided to keep the current NAP. If we can move to the next slide, I don't see it on my screen. Not sure if you do see it. Probably not. Well, I just talk you through. We decided to keep the current NAP, so it will remain a data register. In essence, it means that the real data exchange will be still between the professional, the user of the data, and the CPO itself, or via a third party, so a data aggregator, for instance. And the NAP will only function as a data register. So it will only function as a repository for the source holders of the data. So if you're a user, you can find the data source holders through the NAP. Yeah, it will be better if we could show you the picture of the situation, but if there are any questions, we can discuss them later on then with this image, I guess. But this was very shortly, the IDACS project for activity 2, data collection, European results, and the Netherlands. Other questions, Pauline? I'm sure there are.
Yeah, luckily we have the image on screen at the moment, so hopefully everyone understands it. I have a question here from Koen Noyens. He's asking, why keeps DATEX2? Conversion comes with additional costs. ITS directive will be revised. Can we get DATEX2 required out? Industry already works with other protocols.
Yeah, very relevant question. I agree with you that we are keeping costs as low as possible, and also we don't want to impose the requirements to the CPOs. So we make sure that the solution that we are working on is that, but I'll come back to that in the presentation later on, that the burden will be low for CPOs, and also the costs will be relatively low because we don't have to do a lot to make a translation tool for OCPI to DACS2. But then again, there's the question on the table, like, do we really need this? Do we really need this translation tool? Because if it comes to IDACS, it's clear it's a requirement. We have to do it for the grant agreement. But it's a relevant question, and this is also something that we will take in our lessons learned for IDACS to the European Commission, which is used for, as you already mentioned, an ITS revision, for instance. So as I've heard also from the Commission already, like they feel like it's not really used in the sector, e-mobility sector. So I wonder if it's, yeah, we'll see. We'll take our lessons from IDACS to the, we'll use it for, among other things, the ITS directive.
Yes. I see another question from Peter Loyestein. Does the National Access Point for the Netherlands register have quality checks, data quality checks?
Well, the National Access Point register itself, it doesn't. It's just a repository, so you can find, but I think Bastijn will answer this question in his presentation.
Good to hear from you. Well, for now, we're gonna move on to the next subject. That will be the legislation. Bastijn Ravenhorst will talk us through. Bastijn, I will give the floor to you.
Thank you. Can you all hear me?
Loud and clear.
All right. Well, thanks for attending, everyone. My name is Bastijn Ravenhorst, and yeah, like Hilke said, I will take you through the national regulation we drafted. So thanks a lot. It was already a lot of information to digest, so I hope you guys will hang in there, and hopefully I can also try to save you some time by following this presentation. Maybe you don't need to blow through all the pages of the regulation. So I will start off with a bit of explanation on the legislative process we have gone through. And then I will give you the headlines of the regulation itself, followed by a more detailed explanation on some subjects. I must say I have a bit of a cold, so I hope my voice will last throughout the session, and you can still hear me loud and clear at the end as well. So let's move on to the first slide indeed. So like Hilke explained already, we, alongside IDACS, we've been working on regulation to support and embed everything we worked out in IDACS in the Dutch law. And actually, it's good news that today we can announce that the regulation has been formally published in the good old-fashioned Staatscourant. So from now on, you will be able to find it there. So let me take you through the legislative process. The basis of all of this is, of course, the Alternative Fuels Infrastructure Directive, which has already an article on user information. So we took that as a basis, and we further implemented or worked that out into Dutch law. So we first created a legislative basis, a new article in our national royal resolution on alternative fuels infrastructure. So we had that in public consultation last year, end of last year. Quite a few reactions. After that, we used those reactions to work out the regulation itself, where I will come back to later on. So that was very useful. So after that, we had, of course, the cabinet approval, the Council of State advice, again the cabinet, and now the king himself is hopefully willing to sign this legal basis, and then it will publish this month and will enter into force in July 2021. Then the regulation, which we will speak about more thoroughly now. We created a new article in the Dutch ministerial regulation on alternative fuels infrastructure. We quite recently had that in public consultation in February and March. We had 13 reactions, mainly market players, some sector organizations representing these market players, CPOs and service providers. So we used this consultation again to make a few adjustments to the obligation and to the explanation as well. And then, like I said, the State Secretary just approved it and signed the regulation, so it has been published today. It will enter into force July 2021, and for some provisions, this will be January 1st next year. Next slide, please. You already had it. Thank you. So like I said, we made a couple of adjustments after the last public consultation. I will get back to that later on as well. We made some exemptions regarding public charging stations on private locations. There were quite a few remarks on the energy supplier and the energy product and the percentage green energy delivered at the charging stations. And also we made an exemption regarding opening hours. There has been made a more clear distinction between what it means to provide information to individual users and to professional users. And we also more clearly mentioned the option of providing information by third parties, so more explicitly in the regulation. And last but not least, we merged and renamed some information categories due to the remarks that have been made. Next slide, please. Yeah, so the headlines in 3 slides. So we drafted an obligation for CPOs to provide charge point information that can be used by individual users, users of the charging stations. It should help them to find charging stations more easily, to be sure how they can charge, how they can pay, at what speed, what connectors, etc. And also, is it available at the moment? What are the ad hoc prices? The information can be provided directly. Oh, that's one slide too fast. Yes. So the information can be provided directly or by a third party. So this can be, for example, a data aggregator. It's about all publicly accessible charging stations, including those on private locations, with a few exemptions on the latter. So I will come back to that. It's about static information. So like I said, location, charge speed, percentage green energy. And this last category, by the way, we added after remarks on that in the first public consultation. It was not in the initial concept, but we added that in a later stage. It's secondly about dynamic information, so occupation status, availability, ad hoc pricing. Next slide, please. The information should be provided in a non-discriminatory, easy and open way to individual users, like I said, and this can be done via own websites or apps like we already know them in the market, or by apps of a third party again. And to professional users, it's important that this information or data should be available also via open protocols and formats. And like Hilke already mentioned, the online location of a link to this information should be findable via the national access point, alongside with a description of the data and conditions for access or use if they are applicable. Next slide, please. So last few things. The information, of course, must be accurate, complete, and up to date. For dynamic info, this means it needs to be updated within 1 minute after a status change. So in that case, we are a bit more ambitious than in the case of IDACS, probably. We don't know the final outcome yet, but this might be the case. And we've done that to give maximum comfort to the EV driver. When it comes to static data, the info may be updated within 1 day after a status change. The regulation, like has been said, it will enter into force the 1st of July 2021 with an exemption for information on energy supplier, product, and percentage green energy. And opening hours, this information can be provided the 1st of January 2022. We've decided to create an exemption for these categories, also due to remarks in the consultation. And the regulator, the ACM, will enforce the obligations. So I will now go into a few elements more deeply. I will further explain them, but first I think we have a little poll to see what kind of elements you're most interested in. So maybe you could fill that in again. So all right, so I think the polls are slowly closing. Okay, so mainly about the functioning of the NAP and the accurate, complete, updated information. All right, I'll make sure to touch on that for sure. So can we go back to the presentation then again? All right, so here's a quick overview of the information categories that are obligatory to provide to the users. So I won't mention them all, but like you see, it's static information and dynamic information. So charge speeds, socket types, etc., payment methods. All right, next slide. Like I said, it's an obligation for CPOs, but it can also be filled in by a third party. So that's an important element. Since we see that this is already the case in the market at the moment. We decided to include also the charging stations on private locations, for example, in parking garages, hotels, restaurants, etc. Since we see this is a more and more important category of charging stations, and we want to make them visible in navigation apps and other information products for users. It would be a shame not to use them. We did, however, make a few exemptions regarding these stations on private locations. Also regarding, also because of remarks made in the consultation. So the first one is that if the station is not operated by a professional CPO that has the right systems for this digital exchange of charge point information, then that won't be an obligation to provide the information on these charging stations. Also, if the station owner doesn't want to be or doesn't want the charging station to be found in these navigation apps, since, for example, it wants to keep the charging station for their own customers, then we say, okay, that's all right. You don't need to provide information on those stations then. We also don't oblige information to be provided on stations at a private property near a house, since this could lead to privacy issues. You could see, for example, whether someone's at home or not. So that's not desirable. And lastly, we said there's no obligation to provide information on energy supplier, energy products, and the percentage of sustainable energy, since there are some difficulties for the CPOs to gather this information. They're not always the one with the energy contract. Next slide, please. So there we come at the point of accurate, complete, and updated information. So basically, we describe this in a very generic way, I must admit. So what we say is it must be accurate, complete, and updated, and we only specified that there needs to be a certain update frequency. We also included that in the regulation, in the articles themselves. I already mentioned them. And the detailed descriptions of the information categories that must be provided, they will be findable via the NAP. And those are the descriptions that are being worked out in the IDACS project. Next slide, please. So it must be provided in a non-discriminatory and easy, open way. So non-discriminatory, of course, everyone knows what this means. You can't serve one customer and the other not. So it needs to be available for all users and also all professional users. So in that way, we guarantee that all the charge point information is available for everyone. And for individual users, this means the information is to be provided via apps or websites, can be your own or third-party website, providing, for example, digital maps with charging stations and user information like we already know them in the market. And to professional users, again, via open protocols. And an important element I didn't mention before is that the CPO is allowed to set conditions for access or use. This was an important remark being made by some of the market players. They told us that they want to be sure that the information is not misused. There is a possibility to set conditions for access. And these conditions may, of course, not be unreasonable or discriminating or de facto hinder the development of information services for charge point users, since that is the goal of the regulation. Next slide, please. And the functioning of the national access point. So Hilke already told you a bit about it. So it's about providing the online location of a direct link to the data and the description of the data, and if so, conditions for access and use. It will be provided at the Nationaal Toegangspunt ITS. This is a portal already being used for various data categories, also in different fields, truck parking, intelligent transport systems information. So this can be done by the CPOs directly or by a third party. It has a register function, and important element. Also, this came up during the consultation that the government won't become owner of or provider of the data. It will still be the case that the information exchange will take place between the CPO and the professional user. Like I said, you can set certain conditions to prevent misuse, for example. Next slide, please. And yeah, the regulation will enter into force 1st of July with an exemption for the information categories I already mentioned on energy supply, use, product, and green energy, and also opening hours, since there are a few difficulties to gather this information already before the 1st of July. So we give a little bit more room for implementation. And then the role of the regulator will be that they can investigate after signals of users, for example, by when they get signals of missing or incorrect or outdated information. But of course, they can also decide on their own initiative to do a sector-wide inquiry. So I think that's about it. That was the last slide. Hopefully you're still alive. Was a lot of information. I didn't really follow questions that maybe came up in Slido, so maybe our
No problem, Stijn. I will
our
assist
host
you
can
with
tell
that.
you. Okay.
Yes, up until now there are 3 questions. I will start with the first by Michelle Byings. This is about the public charging points on private locations. If the owner does not allow the CPO to provide the information, how can you be in line with the consumer regulations, as this requires location information in the transaction?
I don't. That's a very difficult question. I don't know exactly what kind of consumer regulation you're pointing at. Maybe I can look into that question later on and come back to that.
Will do. Then there is another question. When is a provider private and when is it professional? And is there a threshold from CPO perspective?
It's about the owner of the charging station. So it's not about how professional a CPO is. It's about the owner of the station. So if it's on a private location, so we really mean stations in the semi-public area. So like I said, restaurants, hotels, and for them it's more like a service, an extra service for the visitors, and we don't want to force them, for example, to make disproportionate investments in systems they do not have when they already installed 1 or 2 charging stations. So we want to keep it reasonable. So that's why we made a few exemptions, and we say, okay, only when these stations are already being operated by a professional CPO, which already has the systems to do so. So that's also comes forward from one of the remarks in the public consultation, that we don't want to create unreasonable obligations.
Yes, thank you. Then there's one more question. Does the national access point support OCPI locations? This is also a more specific question.
Well, yeah, I have to think about that one. I think it's important to realize that the NAP itself won't provide information, so it will still be the CPO and the user of the information. So, and the only thing we say, it needs to be provided via open protocols, and if that's OCPI, if that's the protocol where you use to provide information on location and other categories, that's perfectly fine, and that's I think the protocol mainly used in the Netherlands. So in that case, I don't know if I understood the question right, but then the answer is yes. So we didn't prescribe one specific protocol. As long as it's open and non-proprietary, then it's okay.
Yeah. Maybe it's also good to elaborate a little bit more again on the national access point, that it is a data register. And for that reason, it's a register function. So it links from one to the other. And to get back to the previous question also on data quality, there are some requirements on data quality, but they're not integrated into the national access point. I see one more question here as well. Will foreign national access point act as a repository as well?
Yes, I can take that question. I think Pauline knows maybe a little bit better than I do, but we recently had a call again with all the participating countries within IDACS, and we see that most countries choose for a register form. Some of them choose for a data marketplace or a database, but it's mainly registers. So mainly the same form as we've chosen. Maybe it's good to mention that we've chosen this setup because we see that the market already fulfills a lot of the needs, and we don't see the necessity to take over this role from the government. So we only provide some safeguards now, making sure that all the information is there, but we don't want to interfere too much into the market. So that's why we chose this setup.
Thank you. I see there are no further questions on this topic. If you have any questions, go to slido.idx and the Q&A. There you can add any questions if they're there. Then I would like to move on to the next topic, which are the instruments which are developed for further implementation. Hielke.
Yes, I'll take it over for now. But don't worry, it will be short this time. Just briefly talk you through some instruments. Two of them I will talk you through by myself, and Marta will discuss the general terms. Yeah, the first tool, it's about a IDACS tool that I've just discussed earlier. This first tool is being developed purely for the IDACS project. It's a IDACS tool. So to have data in IDACS2 format is a requirement from IDACS, so we do not want to impose it on CPOs. So we will develop a conversion tool that can be used by CPOs to convert this data from OCPI to IDACS2 when a data user requires this. So it will be built by NDW, which is the organization that hosts that hosts the NAP. And one slide back, please. Yeah, they will build this tool, and it will also be accessible through the NAP, so through NDW. And yeah, as I said, it can be used by CPOs to make this translation to IDACS2. But it's an IDACS requirement. Then next slide, please, because that is more about the national legislation that we've just discussed, and it's a pretty straightforward tool. Actually, it's a manual. It's just like if you have to register at the NAP, then there is a manual that goes through all the steps on how to register on this NAP. It is already on there right now, but we make some updates specifically for CPOs. So for parties who have data on electric charging points. So we make a few updates on that, and will be available in the next month. So you can find it on the homepage of the National Access Point, and it takes you through all the steps that are required for you as a company to register on there and to actually fulfill on the requirements of the legislation. That is it for me. I think Marta can continue with the last instruments tool. Floor is yours, Marta.
Yes, I will. Hello everybody. My name is Maarten Veerakkers. I'm working for the Ministry of Public Works and Water Management as a policy advisor on electric transport. The next 10 minutes I will tell something about, well, not too fast, please. About the general terms and conditions for the provision and use of charge point data, how it came up to draft these terms and conditions. Well, the process we went through, the process we still have to go through, as well as a little bit of the content of the terms and conditions. Yes, next sheet, please. Well, 1 year ago, more than 1 year ago, we had an expert group meeting about data quality, and well, the general conclusion was that data quality is an issue Besides that all CPOs, MSPs benefit from correct data because everybody wants to be found. There was also the point that EV drivers complain to CPOs about wrong information, although they did not share it because it went through a chain, and somewhere in the chain it can go wrong on all kinds of reasons. So the conclusion of that meeting was that it should be good to have one uniform set of conditions for the provision and in use, both sides of charge point data. So we started an initiative, IDACS and the ministry, to draft these general terms and conditions. Next sheet, please. Well, how do we see these general terms and conditions? Well, we think they could serve as an appendix to a private law agreement between CPOs and data users regarding provision and use of charge point data for the purpose. Well, and the purpose is defined in these general terms and conditions because the idea should be that the data will be used to inform travelers. To inform charge point users, and for instance, not to use it for valuation of charge points or CPOs or that kind of things. Yes, next one. Well, about these general terms and conditions, we make a distinction within these terms and conditions between the NOP charge point data and other data. So you can use it for both, but you can also use it for just NOP charge point data. You can use it in bilateral agreements, private agreements, so between CPOs and users of these data. And it can be used partly. It can be used as a whole. Well, that's to be chosen by the CPO. And the general terms and conditions will be, well, here I said it's part of the manual that will be published on the NOP, just like the manual. It has no obligatory status. It's just a guidance. So everybody can choose for himself or herself to use these terms and conditions. Yes, the next sheet, please. After that expert group meeting in February last year, we had a small working group which helped us, the ministry, to draft these terms and conditions. A few parties, MRA Electric, Last Mile Solutions, Fastnet, they helped us in drafting it. And afterwards, in July 2020, we brought it back in the expert group for a review. And after that, we had a first concept of general terms and conditions. Yes, the next sheet. Well, a little bit of content about these terms and conditions. It's about, there are conditions about data provision, some conditions about data use, how to prevent fraud and abuse, something about fees, liability, well, the usual subjects. Also something about perpetual clause. So how can you prevent that somewhere in the chain things go wrong because of abuse or fraud or whatever. And some other provisions which are always in these kind of terms and conditions. Yes, next sheet. That's the last sheet, I think. We will distribute these concept general terms and conditions after this webinar, together with this presentation. You are invited to give feedback on this concept till the 19th of May. You can send it to me. We also still have to do a legal check but that's one of the last steps we want to do. First, we want to have some basis on the content itself. The final version will be translated in English, and as I said already, these general terms and conditions will be published on the National Access Point website. And that brings me to the next poll, I think. It's an initiative we have taken because of an IDACS expert group meeting a year ago, but we are still interested because now here there is a greater group of CPOs, or it's useful to draft and to present via the NAP such a set of general terms and conditions for you. It's a guidance. You can use them in order to have more control on data quality in the chain. So I think if everything goes well, there should be a poll now starting. I see the question, but I don't see. Yes. This one works a little bit different from the other polls. You can just give a reaction in words. The reason for that is that we just wanted to hear your arguments why this is useful or not. I can imagine that especially the CPOs have answered this question. So 13 reactions might be the CPOs in the webinar. So I'm going to study this afterwards in more detail. And I want to thank you for joining this part of the webinar. I give the words back to Pauline.
Yes, thank you, Maarten. Well, we came to the end of this webinar, but there are still some questions open, and I see it's 10 past 5:30, so there's still room to answer these questions. They're back at the Slido Q&A, and let me start with the first one, which was still open from my presentation from the IDRO. The question was raised, why, let me see, why there's not one EU IDRO, but it's not possible within the format to set a country to European Union. Thank you, Misha Byings, for answering that as well. I now have to figure out which one we did and which one did not. Let me see. This is a question also about IDs. Can a charge station owner request an ID? This is an option as well, because it's also the charge point operator and the mobility service provider are able to request an ID. I'm not sure if eventually there could be made a distinction within the format, whether this is the case, but I will have to get back to that if you're only owner of the location, if it's possible. And what happened to the ID if the operator changes? Well, that's also included in the general terms by now. In the general terms, it's also stated that you could have several IDs. So if the operator changes, they can take over a part of the IDs if all of them are going on. And otherwise, these can be changed as well by the IDRO. Hilke, would you like to complement to that answer as well? I see you.
No. I was planning to, but no. You said what I had in mind.
Let me see for new questions. Why are two IDs needed for a company that is a charge point operator and a mobility service provider? This is one organization and it needs two IDs. This is because there are two registers. So there is a register for the charge point operators and there's a register for the mobility service providers as they are contracts. For this reason, you need two IDs. I see a new question about takeover IDs. That would mean that Allego, for instance, can have NetMotion IDs. This is only possible if all the activities are taken over and if it's legally binding that you're taking over the complete ID code and organization. Hilke, are there some more questions which we didn't answer yet and are able to answer at the moment?
As far as I could see, no, but if someone asked a question that we haven't already answered, then please scream. We are happy to answer it. But yeah, as far as I've seen, we've answered everything so far.
Great. Then I would like to go back to the presentation. There's one last slide we would like to share with you. It's actually a roadmap for you, for the CPOs, to set out step by step what to do actually after today, up until the 1st of July when the new regulation will enter into force. It's a roadmap we made. You can see that when the first question is actually, is your data already available at the national access point? If so, please check if your data meets the new legal requirements, the data categories, and also update frequency. If not, please register at the national access point. Hilke already showed it, where it is at the website. There is a manual which you can use or contact the NDW. Furthermore, at the end of the year, the conversion tool will also be available at the national access point. And 1st of January of the upcoming year, 2022, 4 more categories will be added. So make sure you will be able to make these available through the national access point as well. Before I would close this webinar, I would like to thank you for attending. We also still have one more poll. This is the one how you please rate the webinar. 1 is low and 5 is high. We're really looking forward to hear if this was very helpful to you, the information which we shared, the questions we've answered. And I would also like to impress that we will send out the presentation and the video afterwards. These will be shared together with the general terms and conditions, which Maarten just highlighted. I see most of you were very happy to be with this webinar and it was very useful. Thank you very much. And I would like to thank you as well on behalf of Hilke, Maarten and Bastijn. And have a great afternoon. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
everyone.
Thank you.